I'm Chris Sauls, and this is Thinking Thursday, a podcast for engineers, coders, sysadmins, architects, and tech leaders who build the backbone of the modern world. This is for those who think in systems, dream in frameworks, and lead with curiosity. We don't just adapt to disruption, we anticipate it. We architect the future, even when the rest of the world doesn't understand what we're building. We're the ones who stay up late refactoring the solution because good enough never sits right. We are allergic to mediocrity, restless with routine, and wired for iteration, impact, and innovation. We aren't just surviving the AI wave, we're riding it, reimagining our careers, rewriting our companies, and re-engineering what leadership looks like in the world of layoffs, lean teams, and limitless change. Sure, we've been burned by broken systems, bad bosses, and bureaucracy masquerading as process, but we don't stop. Because we know something others don't. Every problem is solvable. Every system can scale. Every setback is a signal. While most are stuck obeying outdated org charts and titles, we lead from anywhere from the code base, from the cloud, from the crisis. We are the self-leading, systems-thinking, impact-driven architects of what's coming next. And we don't wait for permission, we build it anyway. This is Thinking Thursday for the tech minds who lead with heart, grow through change, and never stop thinking. Welcome, everybody. It is Thinking Thursday. I'm your host, Chris Sauls, and we're on episode 16. And today we're going to get into a topic that really, for me, is probably one of my favorites as far as things that you need to talk about, and it's relationships. We spend a lot of time in relationships. And where I'm headed with that is, I wish I had the image. We've all seen it. I am not talking about the image from the Coldplay concert. I'm not talking about that relationship. What I want to get into today, as far as relationships, we all have them. And I'm going to start with our first relationship, and it's our relationship with ourselves as an adult. As an adult, one of the things we have is our relationship with ourselves and how we treat ourselves. And what do we do for ourselves to really make sure that we are tuned up or tuned in to those around us in our everyday relationships? And this could be in the workplace, or this could be our personal relationships. I'll get into more of that in a moment. Again, this is Thinking Thursday. This is a free thinking moment for me. I tried not to pre-prepare these too much. Sometimes I prepare material. Last week was prepared. This week is just me talking about something that came to mind that I really feel like we may miss out on. We might not really pay attention to all the details. So a little history on me, which might make this a little more relevant. I've survived 5 layoffs in the technology career path over the last 3 decades. I've also survived, unfortunately, and fortunately in ways, I've survived 3 divorces. So relationships really matter. And my personal relationships oftentimes have definitely created a little bit of havoc in what I would say my day-to-day relationship with my work, with the people I work with, those things. And we're going to get into a bit of that, of how that affects us in the workplace. So what do I mean by workplace relationships? If you're a leader, what's your relationship with your team? That's, first and foremost. If you've got a team, 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe even larger, what's your relationship to them? How close is it? How removed are you from it? The other part of it is, do you need to be removed from it? Do you need to be too walled up away from your team? I know a lot of times for a lot of leaders, and I've lived this, I've been this, and I've grown over the years to be a little bit more, what I would say, in tune with my team and how much they're willing to share depending on the team member and their way of communicating. By chance, I love stories. So if you're going to meet with me, the first thing I want to do is, hey, let's talk about, what did you do the weekend? How's the week going? What your kids are up to? If you're in a basketball league, how are things going? Summertime, are you playing golf? I don't know. But whatever your hobbies, what those things are, I want to go there first before we really get into the meat of statistical numbers or the checklist items. And that's me. Now I have worked with plenty of people that they want the data up front. So you come into the meeting and you have to start out with the data. You really have to get into that. So when we talk about these relationships, how far should they go? How open as a leader do you have to be to these things? And what really matters, I believe, is knowing enough about your team to show your that not just to show that you really do care, like making sure like if they've got kids, check in on them once in a while. If they're married, obviously, check to see how, hey, how's the wife doing? How's your wife doing? Or how's your husband doing? Um, those things matter, those little small questions. And it gives a person a chance to kind of open up. Now, you also have to be vulnerable and you've got to be willing to have a bit of that discussion. And again, this comes to knowing your team, the relationship, knowing how much they're willing to share versus how much they're not willing to share. And the other thing is what's the boundary of not oversharing, correct? And I said I would talk about our relationship with ourselves. I find oftentimes in my career for me that I have often neglected myself. I may be neglecting my health. I may not be being a great role model for doing physicals, having doctor checkups like you should, going to the doctor when you should get checked out. And also, I can remember being in the office nowadays, remote, big difference, right? Is I can remember coming to work sick and knowing that that's not the right thing to do, but that was the perception. The perception at the time was show up at all costs. Work was more important. And I think we've really transitioned that with remote, but also COVID triggered a lot of that. Like if you're sick, don't go to the office, don't get other people sick. I actually think that was probably one of the things for anybody that is going back into the workplace is that people have now realized, hey, if I've got something and I'm not feeling well, it's best for me not to go to the office. I think that's a great lesson to be learned. I think that's a great lesson that we have learned. Again, the personal relationship with yourself, how do you treat yourself? What are you saying to yourself in the morning? Your self-talk really controls who you are and actually can imprison you or can set you free. I mean, those are the things that come up. Are you getting up in the morning like, whoa, me, the world is against there's nothing going right? Or are you getting up in the morning talking about, I will, I must, and I can, or I can, I will, and I must complete these things and building yourself up to achieve the things that you can and being positive about it because that energy level will come across to your team. It will show them, where are you at? If you're taking care of yourself, trust me, your team will begin to take care of themselves because they see you doing it. They model what they see in the leader. And it's the same in your household. If you're making a great role model and you're doing these things in these relationships, if your family sees you taking care of yourself, they're going to be more apt to take care of themselves. And, I have to, admit as a father, as a husband, I haven't always been the best at making sure that my family understood, when I was working hard and doing all these things, when I wasn't taking care of myself, they would try to go that extra mile for themselves. And that's probably has not been the best thing for many of them along the way. Just having to learn and unlearn and relearn the lesson. And that's the other thing with relationships. Being able to unlearn from, I would say, I don't even want to say bad relationships, but maybe, you have workplace relationship and with a person and it just did not work well. You could not figure out how to work with that person well. Don't let that deter you from trying to grow from it or deter you from learning more. Maybe there's something generally that happens a lot of times when people are more alike than not alike. They'll be a little bit more rubbed, and it could also be competition. There's a lot of reasons those relationships happen. But what do you grow? What do you learn from it? How do you grow from it? What do you do to, be better as a leader or just better as a person? And, I really talk about this relationship piece because It's in how we communicate with each other. And when I talked about the team, but how are you with your leadership team? How do you come off there? Is there a level of leadership where it's open and transparent, or is it very, very hierarchical, a hierarchy set up? By the way, if I didn't say that correctly, send me a message. But if it's in a hierarchy and you're not, that's like, top down leadership, and they don't want you to, I don't know, like they don't want you to do certain things, or, you got to go to your superior first. You can't go to a leader to the left or the right without going to your direct upline first. Uh, that type of leadership, I was in the military, and that's the way it is in the military. You always go to your first line supervisor, and then from there you can branch up, but you better let them know first. And if you're in a company that operates that way, it might stifle some of the communications, and it can stifle some of the relationships. I believe leadership teams have to be vulnerable. They have to be transparent. They have to be willing to let other people in. And that gets into, and this is for technology companies, really for anybody. This is pretty standard stuff that I'm talking about with these relationships. But the leadership team has to have a relationship as well. And again, you have to know how that balances, right? Because if you're on a team, you don't understand how your direct line supervisor communicates to their upline supervisor, that can create issues, because you might be telling your manager a bunch of information about something. And if they're not conveying that up, and then you have one of these, what we call a skip one-on-one, where, say, like in my old position, my director might have a one-on-one with one of my teammates or one of my team members. Well, if you're not passing that information up, do you think that's going to come up? Then now your actual team member is, caught, because they may get into a conversation and say, well, yeah, I let Chris know this, but, and then your director doesn't know that. It turns into a mess when those relationships aren't solid. And that's the reason why you have to bridge that relationship between the different leaders, because no one should be wandering around a company on eggshells, even if the CEO's in town. Yes, I know CEOs carry a lot of power, they carry a lot of, a lot of clout. But at the end of the day, they're just like everybody else. They're there for the company. They're there to make sure the company's progressing. And no one, no matter what the person's role is, should be afraid to have a conversation with someone because they're concerned they're going to say the wrong thing, or that type of thing. You should have the relationships where it's having a conversation with your coworker, or having a conversation with your peer. Yeah, obviously it's going to be tailored a little bit. When you're in a company, that stuff happens, but the relationships have to be open. They have to be transformative. Really, the other part of relationships that I think for me over my career, I talked about divorce. And we've recently seen this huge thing with the Coldplay concert, and see how improper relationships can occur. Doesn't make them right, doesn't stop them from happening either. But in the workplace, when relationships like that have occurred, it can create a ripple effect throughout the organization. There now could be infighting because there's people that are on one person's side versus on the other person's side. Then there's the, how do you work all of that out? And it's the leader that has to step into that and begin to manage that out, because that's going to take conflict resolution. There's got to be open communications, and you've got to work on the relationships. People have to have working relationships where they can understand how far this is going to go. How big is it going to get? Depends on the size of the company in some cases. But the relationships within the company can definitely affect the personal relationships. And by far, your personal relationships can affect your company. I think, for me, I think back on, um, you know, going through what I would say was probably one of the more painful periods, was going through my first divorce. And in that process, I was not the same employee for a period of time. At one point, I became a single parent. And during that process, I had to, and there's a lot of single parents out there, and ladies, the ones of you that are single parents, guys as well, single parenting is not easy. And you have to make big adjustments when that occurs. So getting in the single, that area, that affected my relationships. It affected my relationships in the office. It changed my relationships outside the office. And a lot of things had to transpire. In the beginning, I think I was handling it fairly well, but there came a point where I wasn't as productive because my life was kind of, in shambles on the back end. And that does affect your work. And businesses, companies, all of us have to understand that that's there. And this gets back to having those relationships where there's a two-way communications where you can actually have this conversation. Maybe you don't have to give all the details. Again, I remember I said, do not overshare. Leaders don't want team members to overshare. It happens. The other thing is leaders shouldn't overshare. I've probably been a culprit of oversharing in the past, probably maybe oversharing for some right now. Through that process, your personal relationships will affect your professional. And I can tell you right now, if you prioritize in your life all of your professional growth over your personal growth, your personal relationships will suffer. I said that a few weeks back. There is no doubt in my mind that as we grow, our professional path is growing, our personal path needs to be growing in conjunction. And if they get too incongruent and they're not following each other, you will struggle with relationships. Those relationships you struggle with in your personal life will begin to affect your professional relationships. And it's how it works. We have to grow. We have to learn to communicate, to gravitate to people. We need to have empathy. We need to learn to listen. We need to learn to express ourselves after the emotion is passed. Not going to happen every time. I don't think, I'm never going to tell someone that you're not going to have, heated debates at work. That can happen. Sometimes some of the best projects I've ever worked on had some of those most heated debates, and we got the best out of it. But we do have to work past that, and you have to work past those emotional places. I know for people that have known me for years, for me to even say having not allowing the emotion to override in a conversation, that was one of the biggest lessons of my life. Learning to not allow the emotion that was coming up to come out, and not controlling and like just hiding behind or trying to cover the emotion, but not allowing it to be the lead of the communications. And it's the same thing. We've all heard this, right? Before you send an email, if you just got a heated exchange in email, we've all had one of those, I believe. Maybe nowadays it's text, or I'm not sure, but either text or even maybe a FaceTime. But if you've had that situation, your response, you need to take a minute, let it cool off, then respond. Reread what you wrote before you send it. And if you're thinking about that, if you're doing that for an email or doing that for a text, why wouldn't we do that in the moment of a conversation? It can lead to a lot of success, really getting to the root of whatever's going on. And that's, again, it's not always negative. It could be a positive thing. Maybe you need the quiet team member that's very shy, that doesn't really speak out in team meetings. Maybe you need that person to share the idea that they have. And you need to, tease out the details from it for them, not for yourself, but for them, so that you can move on this big thing that they are able to do. But you've got to know that. You got to work toward that. You got to work on that relationship. That's pretty much it for me today on relationships. I think I've covered the basics here. I'm going to get into a few things. Heard this just the other night. I'm going to use a few things from a friend of mine. Russell Scott's presentation at let's see, make sure I get this right. ATD, the Association of Training and Development. They had their meeting here in Raleigh. I got a chance to attend and listen to Russell's talk. And one of the things he was talking about is respect. Always start there, right? Be respectful. Having empathy. Those things are going to carry you a long ways. Be respectful, have empathy. And in the moment, build trust through that. Build trust through that respect and that empathy with your team, with your leadership team, and in your personal life. I mean, I cannot say the number of times that I look back now and realize I just, again, internal self-talk doesn't always pan out to give you the right result on the outside. And I had to unlearn a lot of that over the years. So again, communicate respectfully, have empathy, and build trust. You guys have a great week. This was Thinking Thursday, episode 16. I'm your host, Chris Sauls. If you're enjoying these, please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. I would really appreciate it. I'm definitely working on this each and every week, working on the aesthetics, but also working on the topics. And, by the way, I do want to step into this one more piece here. If you wonder why I spoke on relationships today and why it was on my mind, I did a basic, I guess what you would say, an MVP, a minimum viable product that I put out, and I put it out online and I let people try it out. And I asked specific questions about communications and DISC. And if you don't know what DISC is, it's an assessment. And that assessment allows you to understand what your leadership style is, but also how you communicate, and then how you basically how you interact with people under pressure. But then what's your day-to-day like? It's really interesting results. As I sent that out, I sent it out originally to the professional side, to all of my technologists, and software developers, engineers, all you guys. And the feedback on it was, it was good. But the reach was not that far. Like, I didn't see a lot of people engage with it. Interestingly enough, look back out at the same group of people. All I converted it for was asking about, how are your relationships? How are you in your relationships? How are you doing in your relationships? It was 10x the response factor. Like, the responses on that were so much higher. So relationships obviously are something that we all have them, but it's something where there are things that we need to work on. So if you're struggling in a relationship, personal or professional, and you're a technologist, feel free to drop me a line, put a message out there. Be more than glad to have a conversation with you about it. I am a coach. I do coach on career progression for technologists. I do coach on relationship, how to improve it through communications. Just putting those things out there today. I really appreciate all of you. I appreciate those that watch and respond and send me things every week. If you've got anything you'd like to give me back on this, or any feedback you'd like to give me, hey, you can drop it in the chat. I don't block those things. I let them go. I really want to hear from you. I want to understand what I can do to better serve this community that I have been a part of for 3 decades. You guys have a wonderful Thursday. Take care, and see you next week.